I hired you to tend the garden today. Leave by morning. The lonely cowboy said it without turning around, as if the words were nothing more than a routine he had practiced too many times. His boots rested heavily on the wooden porch, and his eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the land stretched endlessly beneath the fading sun. Behind him stood the native woman, Nokomis. Dirt clung beneath her fingernails, and the scent of earth surrounded her like a quiet truth. She watched his back, sensing the loneliness carved into his posture. My name is Nokomis, she said softly. He paused. Only briefly. Ethan, he replied. There's food inside. You can sleep in the shed. The door closed. Nokomis did not move. Rejection had shaped her bloodline. Her people had heard similar words for generations, spoken calmly, enforced cruelly. Still, she had come because the land itself had called her. Some places recognized blood even when people refused to. As dusk settled, Nokomis returned to the garden. The soil here felt different, warm, alive, familiar. She knelt and pressed her palms into the earth, and a deep ache stirred in her chest, as if memory itself were rising through her veins. Her grandmother's voice returned to her. They did not conquer us with strength alone. They conquered us with lies. Nokomis closed her eyes and the land answered. Long before fences scarred the plains, her ancestors lived freely here. They did not own the land, they belonged to it. Rivers were teachers. Trees were elders. Children learned respect before language. The dead were buried beneath the soil that had fed them, completing the circle of life. Then the settlers came. At first they arrived with smiles and promises. Treaties were signed in languages her ancestors could not read. The words spoken aloud promised peace, shared land, protection. But the papers told a different story. When her people realized they had been deceived, it was already too late. Soldiers followed the treaties. Guns followed the soldiers. Her ancestors were ordered to leave, temporarily. When they refused, force replaced negotiation. Homes were burned. Crops destroyed. Sacred sites trampled under boots. Women were dragged away. Children were torn from their mothers' arms and sent to distant schools where their language was beaten out of them, where their hair was cut as punishment, where their names were replaced with numbers and foreign words. Those who resisted were labeled violent. Those who cried were labeled weak. Her great-great-grandfather had stood on this very land and refused to leave. He was shot in front of his family. His body was left where it fell, a warning to others. The survivors were marched away. The sick collapsed. The elderly were abandoned. Many never reached the reservations they were promised. Those who died were buried without ceremony, far from home. And then the land was renamed. Sold, they said. Legally transferred. As if blood could be erased with ink. Inside the ranch house, Ethan stood at the window, watching Nokomis in the garden. He told himself he was only observing, but the truth unsettled him. She moved through the land as if it recognized her. As if it softened beneath her touch. The garden had never thrived for him. No matter how much effort he put in, the soil resisted. Under Nokomis' hands, it seemed to breathe again. That night, the storm came violently. Thunder shattered the sky. Rain fell like judgment. Nokomis woke in the shed, heart racing. The wind carried something more than weather, it carried urgency. She ran barefoot into the rain. Mud pulled at her feet as she reached the garden and fell to her knees, pressing her palms into the ground. The visions came faster this time. She saw soldiers dragging elders by their hair. She saw mothers screaming as children were taken. She saw bodies left behind on forced marches. The pain of generations surged through her, and she cried out into the storm. Her hand struck stone. She brushed away the mud and froze. A carved symbol emerged, ancient, unmistakable. A boundary marker placed by her people long before maps were drawn to erase them. "This is ours," she whispered. At dawn, Ethan found her kneeling in the mud, soaked and shaking. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Nokomis stood slowly and met his eyes. "This land belonged to my ancestors." Ethan shook his head. "My family's owned this ranch for generations." "So has the theft," she said quietly. She showed him the stone. Something inside him cracked. His grandfather's warnings returned. Never dig too deep near the garden, never ask too many questions. Stories he had dismissed suddenly carried weight. "They burned us," Nokomis continued. "They renamed us. They stole our children and called it education. And when we survived, they called it history." Ethan's voice trembled. "Why didn't anyone say anything?" "They did," she replied. No one listened. He did not ask her to leave. Days passed. Conversations replaced silence. Ethan listened as Nokomis spoke of generational trauma, of families still searching for lost children, of traditions nearly erased. One evening as the sun dipped low, Ethan found himself watching Nokomi's brush her long, dark hair by the fire. It fell like a river down her back, untouched by time. "They're beautiful," he said before he could stop himself. She looked at him, surprised. "My hair." "Yes," he said quietly. "It's like the land. Strong. Untamed. Alive." She hesitated, then handed him the comb. He moved slowly, gently, running the comb through her hair with care, as though afraid of breaking something sacred. His fingers trembled slightly. "No one has touched my hair since my grandmother," she said softly. "I'm honored," he replied. In that moment something shifted. Not possession. Not desire alone. Respect. The town noticed. Whispers turned into threats. Lawyers appeared. Friends urged Ethan to protect his land. He stood at a crossroads. One night he told Nokomis, "If this land has a name, it should be yours." He filed papers to rename the land Nokomis Valley, acknowledging its true history. The backlash was fierce. Court battles followed. Evidence surfaced, burial sites, testimonies, records long ignored. The stone marker became proof of what had always been known. The court ruled for shared stewardship. The land finally spoke, and this time it was heard. Their love grew slowly, carefully. Ethan learned that love did not always leave. Nokomis learned that healing could grow alongside justice. Under the stars one night, Ethan said, "I once told you to leave by morning." She smiled. "You were afraid." "I still am," he admitted. "But I'd rather be afraid with you than empty without you." They married in the open fields, barefoot on land that had finally been named truthfully. The garden flourished. Children laughed. The land remembered. And what had been stolen through cruelty and silence finally found its way home, through love, truth, and respect. That a year after their wedding, one quiet evening as the sun sank behind the distant hills of Nokomis Valley, Nokomi sat on the porch, her gaze fixed on the fertile garden below. A shadow of worry clouded her usually serene face. Finally she turned to Ethan and, her voice trembling slightly, said, "It's been a year since our wedding, yet we haven't been blessed with a child. Why hasn't the land granted us this joy?" Her words were heavy with more than disappointment. They carried generations of longing. For Nokomis, motherhood was not just a desire, it was a prayer. She wanted to see her lineage, once threatened with erasure, breathe life once more on the land of her ancestors. Yet each passing month only deepened a quiet fear in her heart. Ethan took her hands in his gaze steady and reassuring. "It's not because of us Nokomis," he said softly. "The land does not withhold love as punishment. We must have patience and hope." But Nokomis' unease remained. Determined to help her, Ethan consulted his uncle, an elder who lived in the nearby hills and was well versed in the old herbal knowledge of the region. Through him they called upon a wise herbal healer, a woman whose eyes reflected both time and ancient wisdom. The healer examined Nokomis carefully, asked questions, checked her pulse, and studied the herbs she had gathered from the valley. From a blend of forest roots, dried flowers, and tree bark, she prepared a potent herbal remedy. "This will nurture not just the body but the spirit," she said. "When the land gives its blessing, it does so in its own time, but it always comes." Nokomis took the medicine diligently. A month passed, and one morning she ran to Ethan with tears of joy in her eyes. "I am going to be a mother," she whispered, trembling, yet smiling from deep within her soul. 9 months of hope, patience, and love followed. Then one bright morning as the garden bloomed in full glory, their daughter came into the world. When Ethan held her in his arms, tears streamed down his face. Nokomis pressed their child to her chest, feeling the warmth of life against her heart, and whispered gratitude to the earth. This child was more than just their daughter. She was proof that the generations who had suffered, who had been torn from their land, could rise again. Through love, patience, and the bond with their ancestors, life had returned to the soil, and the legacy of Nokomis' people would live on once more in her daughter's laughter, her tiny hands, and the fertile land around them.